Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Let's start Perpurium lecture. And Perpurium is a very important topic. Lot of MCQs came from this topic regarding its physiological changes in Perpurium, complications in Perpurium, infant feeding, and contraception and management during Perpurium. So let's start. Points to be discussed. In definition, we will discuss definition, physiological changes, management of perpurium, complications of perpurium, infant feeding, and contraception. So what the perpurium is? Perpurium is the 6 weeks after completion of third stage of labor. And what about physiological changes in perpurium? We will see about the genital tract changes and changes in the endometrium, vaginal discharge, ovarian function, cardiovascular, and coagulation, and plus urinary tract. So what about reproductive tract? After delivery, vagina regains its rugues and tone, and hymen remnants, they became like in the form of maritiforms. And cervix, what about cervix? Cervical lacerations that occur during the delivery, it will not cervix cannot become as a pre-pregnancy. So you can see in the picture that nulliparous os is pinpoint and the parous os is transverse slit like. So what about the uterus size? Uterus lies 4 centimeter below the umbilicus, and its weight soon after the delivery is 1 kg, and after 24 hours fundal height decreases 1.25 centimeter per day. Okay, so at 4 weeks its weight become 100 gram, and remember the 100 gram is not uh, definitely this is more than the nulliparous weight of the uterus. It's pre-pregnancy in nulliparous, the weight of the uterus is around 50 to 70 gram, but after 4 weeks it becomes 100 gram, and at 2 weeks uterus is not palpable above the symphysis pubis. Okay, what about endometrium regeneration? The most important MCQ frequently asked that at what time the endometrium regeneration completed. So it is completed by 3 to 4 weeks, and it is written in the Dewhurst. According to Dewhurst, it is at page number 434, it is 3 to 4 weeks, and in 10 teachers it is 3 weeks. So maximum, if 4 weeks isn't in the option, you can choose 4 weeks, and if 4 weeks is not there, then you choose 3 weeks. Okay, what about the physiology? And actually decidua bisalis, the superficial layer of the decidua bisalis shed off during the perpurium, and the basal layer of the decidua, that is the source for the new endometrium. So that is, this shedding actually is the formation of lochia, and lochia is the different types at different time of during perpurium. So within one first week, at around 1 to 4 day, the lochia is lochia rubra, that is red in color due to increase in RBCs, and the lochia serosa, that is pink in color, and it is from 5 to 9 days, and mean duration of the lochia serosa is 22 to 27 days, and in 10 to 15% of women it stay for 6 weeks, and there are more RBCs in lochia serosa, less more WBCs, less RBCs. And next, lochia alba, that is white yellow white in color, and it is around 10 to 15 days, and there are plenty of WBCs, that's why its color is this, and it may last for 1 month. Persistent red lochia, if it persists, what does it mean? It means there is delayed involution of the uterus, and that may be due to infection or retained product of conception. What the lochia is? Lochia, I have told that it is the blood stained uterine discharge that is comprised of blood and necrotic decidua. And which decidua? The superficial layer of the decidua. Okay, so there is one more line, that transient increase bleeding between 7 and 14 days. What is this? This is actually delayed postpartum bleeding, and you can also say that this is secondary postpartum hemorrhage. It occurs in 1 to 2% of the patients, and it mostly occurs between 8 and 14 days after birth. And this is actually due to the sloughing of the placental site, and its bleeding is self-limiting, and if bleeding does not settle, further investigations is required, and you will perform ultrasound examination. You know, the secondary postpartum hemorrhage, the most common reasons for this is delayed involution, that is due to the infection or RPOCs. So we will go for the ultrasound, and if there are significant RPOCs are there and there is need for the urgent suction evacuation, so the suction evacuation should be done, but must give first antibiotic to the patient. And if there is no urgency of doing suction evacuation urgently, so better to give antibiotic for 12 hours and then move on to the suction evacuation or the removal of the RPSAs. Next, if endometritis, this condition is due to RPOCs, okay, then we will give intravenous antibiotic in the form of metronidazole, cephalosporin, clindamycin or gentamicin. And if RPSAs are not there, then we will give metronidazole, comoxiclave. They are sufficient. Okay, no need for the IV antibiotics. So now we move next. What about the ovarian function? Ovarian function in a non-lactating woman, ovulation occurs as early as 27 days, and the mean time is 70 to 75 days. But in lactating woman, it occurs at around 6 months. Okay, also you can choose 21 day for the ovulation in non-lactating woman. Okay, menstruation resumes by 12 weeks in 70% of the patients who are non-lactating, and the mean time to first menstruation is 7 to 9 weeks. Prolactin normal at becomes 6 weeks, and non-lactating women and in lactating women it becomes normal at 3 months. Actually prolactin prolactin start falling from the highest level that as in the pregnancy, but it remains high above the baseline normal level, but gradually it falls towards the normal level, and it becomes normal at 3 months if the patient is lactating, and if the patient is not lactating it becomes normal at 6 weeks. Okay, this chart is for the circulation and coagulation changes, and early purpurium and late purpurium. Cardiovascular in heart rate falls 14% by 48 hours and normal by 2 weeks, and stroke volume rises over 48 hours and normal by 2 weeks, and cardiac output remains elevated and then falls over 48 hours, and it becomes normal by 24 weeks. 24 weeks cardiac output, and blood pressure rises over 4 days, normal by 6 weeks, and plasma volume initial increase and then falls, and progressive decline in the first week, and coagulation fibrinogen rises in first week and it becomes normal by 6 weeks. Coagulation factors most remains elevated and they becomes normal by 3 weeks. Platelet count falls and then rises and they become normal by 6 weeks. And now you can see that all these are coagulating factors and these are rising in the purpurium as well. That's why thromboembolism is highest risk in the purpurium. And fibrinolysis, a rapid reversal of pregnancy inhibition of the tissue plasminogen activator. Okay, so what about urinary tract? Urinary tract changes like pelvic, the pelvic dilatation, hydroureter, and these become almost eliminated within 2 to 3 weeks, and the complete returns to normal in 6 to 8 weeks, and GFR normal in 2 weeks. That GFR remains high in next 2 weeks. Reason being, there is need for the postpartum diuresis to in pregnancy. Plasma volume increases, plus the use of oxytocin in the labor, it also causes the water retention. So postpartum diuresis is important to for the decrease of increase plasma volume. So GFR remains high during first 2 weeks, and it becomes normal at 2 weeks. So what about postpartum diuresis? I have told you that fluid loading prior to epidural and antidiuretic effect of oxytocin, increased fluid intake from breastfeeding mother, and leading to all these things leading to increased urine output. Plus already in pregnancy there is a rise in plasma volume, so after pregnancy body has to get rid of this extra water. So bladder over distension can occur. Why? Because of that process of birth, when the head compresses, putting the pressure on the pelvic floor, the nerves are running in the pelvic floor and the muscles there, and they become damaged, or it becomes a transient effect, or it may become a permanent effect. So it due to this it may cause bladder over distension. And when the bladder over distension, its tone decreases, and increase in the residual volume, incomplete emptying, and also due to the stasis of the urine, there is increased risk of urinary tract infection in the postpartum period. So what about the weight loss and thyroid function? So weight loss immediately after delivery, 4.5 to 6 kg, and by 6 weeks 28% of the women return to pre-pregnancy, and thyroid volume return over 12 weeks, and thyroxine returns within 4 weeks. Complications of the purpurium regarding thromboembolism, puerperal infection, urinary complication, incontinence, secondary postpartum hemorrhage we have discussed already, and puerperal psychological disorders already we have discussed in the maternal medicine. Okay, so thromboembolism, all the charts I have shared already, how you will calculate the score for giving thromboprophylaxis in the purpurium. So you will use this chart, and as well as other charts I have frequently shared with all of you for calculating the score and deciding to give thromboprophylaxis. So this is the evidence, actually, thromboembolic disease, pregnancy, and the purpurium acute management, green top guidelines of published in April 2015. The line written is venous thromboembolism can occur at any stage of pregnancy, but the purpurium is the time of highest risk, with estimates of relative risk of approximately 20-fold. Okay, so this is the chart, for the thromboembolic event, like pulmonary thromboembolism. If the patient came with the symptoms of thromboembolism, you will follow this chart, okay, to evaluate that patient in the pregnancy or in the purpurium. In both conditions, this is the same chart for to follow. I will not go into detail because this is a separate topic, but you must know that you should follow these charts. Okay, now what is puerperal infection? Puerperal pyrexia, puerperal sepsis. Puerperal pyrexia, what is it? It is the temperature of 38 degrees centigrade or 100.4 Fahrenheit on any two of occasions of first 10 days, exclusive of first 24 hours. Okay, okay, and within 24, if we talk about within 24 hours, the temperature of 38.7 degrees centigrade or higher that can be included in puerperal pyrexia. This is written in this definition that I have mentioned in the slide is from high risk, page number 1970, and what I am telling you about within first 24 hours, that is from EBM. Okay. What about puerperal sepsis? Puerperal sepsis can be done due to any infection within the body, but the name puerperal sepsis is given to the infection of the genital tract. Okay, genital tract, overall the vagina, cervix, uterus, tubes, and occurring any point between the onset of rupture of membranes and 42nd day postpartum, with fever and one or more of the following. One condition is the fever and one from the following, which are pelvic pain, abnormal vaginal discharge, abnormal foul smelly vaginal discharge, and delay in ovulation. Okay, but what is puerperal infection? Now all other causes includes in this heading puerperal infection. Okay, the urinary tract infection, chest infections, pyelonephritis, all these included, breast conditions, mastitis, so all these included in puerperal infection. These are not, they will not come under the heading of puerperal sepsis. Okay, so this is the SOFA score for the assessment of and evaluation of the patient that came with the sepsis. So this one is the score including respiration, coagulation, liver and cardiovascular, central nervous system, renal. And the other one, that is the small table, table 2, this includes the quick assessment of the patient. Quick assessment means all this includes only 3 points like systolic blood pressure equal to or more than 90, score 0, and if it is less than 90, score 1, and respiratory rate less than 25 breaths per minute, score 0, more than or equal to 25 breaths per minute, score 1, and alert mentation means if the patient is alert, score 0, and if not alert, score is 1. So which score is significant? 2. If patient takes 2 point in this score, this is significant. And SOFA score means sepsis related organ failure assessment. Okay, these are few charts from the 10 teachers that are important, and you can have a look on these charts regarding organisms commonly associated with puerperal genital tract infections like aerobes, gram positive, gram negative, anaerobic bacteria, and miscellaneous like chlamydia, mycoplasma hominis, ureaplasma urinalicum, and common risk factors for the puerperal infection. You know, this is the very commonly frequently asked question about the risk factors. Obesity is the major risk factor. Whenever they ask about the most common risk factor, always choose obesity, and next number is diabetes. Okay, symptoms of the puerperal infection: there may be malaise, headache, fever, rigors, abdominal discomfort, vomiting, diarrhea. It can also present with diarrhea. There will also be a complaint of diarrhea, and when the diarrhea is there, you must be more vigilant. Offensive lochia, secondary PPH. Signs of the puerperal pelvic infections are the pyrexia, tachycardia. Uterus will be boggy and tender, larger, and infected wounds. There may be and paralytic ileus, peritonism, indurated adnexa, and bogginess of the pelvic lining. It may be abscess, due to the abscess. And what are investigations for the puerperal genital tract infections? Full blood count for the leukocytosis, anemia, thrombocytopenia, urea and electrolytes, fluid and electrolyte imbalance for, and culture of blood and swabs from the high vagina or infected wound, that is for the definitely for growth, bacterial growth. And pelvic ultrasound will be done for the assessment of retained products of conception, or there may be the pelvic abscess. Clotting screen for the disseminated intravascular coagulation and blood lactate. Very important, it shows acidosis. If the blood serum lactate level is equal to or more than 4 millimole, it means there is acidosis. And tissue hypoperfusion. Arterial blood gas. Arterial blood gas for the acidosis and hypoxia. So there is one more box that indicates clinical presentation. You can have a look on it, like chlamydia trachomatis. Puerperal parametritis may develop in 1/3 of women who had pre-existing infection, but presentation is usually delayed. That I have told you already, that chlamydia will present late. If question of endometritis will come about, and they mention that at 14 day, then you will choose chlamydia. And what about management? Mild to moderate infections can be treated with broad spectrum antibiotic comoxiclave or cephalosporin, such as cephalexin plus metronidazole. Okay, this is depending on the severity. If the severity is more, then we will choose the other antibiotics. I will tell you later. Diagnosis to rule out in patient with puerperal fever, that is pneumonic, WWW. W means wind. Wind means atelectasis, pneumonia, that mostly occurs within first 24 hours. Water urinary tract infection mostly occurs 1 to 2 post stop day. And worm endometritis usually occur 2 to second to third post op day. And wound, surgical site wound infection, mostly the MCQ came for wound infection, and there is mentioned that on the 4th post op day patient develops fever and all these things. What is the most common cause? That is the wound infection. VOC, septic thrombophlebitis, it can be up to 5 to 6 day, but it can be later on. And wander drugs can be a cause. And watermelon means congestive mastitis that occurs second or third day, that is not infective, that is congestive. And infective mastitis occurs 7 to 10 day. Prevention of sepsis, the most important point is the prophylactic antibiotic cephalosporin comoxiclave with metronidazole before skin infection incision. So this is written in 10 teachers, page number 281, and this is an MCQ answer. Okay, when the patient came with sepsis, follow sepsis 6. Sepsis 6 means 3 give, 3 take. What we will give? We give high flow oxygen, we give broad spectrum antibiotic, we give IV fluids. And what we will take? We will take blood cultures, we will take serum lactate and hemoglobin, and we will measure the urine output. Okay, this is the picture. Again, there is written sepsis 6, and also we are doing all these 6 steps to this patient. And when we give high flow oxygen to the patient, our aim is to keep the oxygen saturation more than or equal to 94%. And if even after giving fluid resuscitation, patient remains in persistent hypotension, then we will give vasopressors. But first we give IV fluids, and IV fluids we will give at a rate of 20 ml. So you can see here, like at this slide number 4, that we will give fluid at 20 ml per kg crystalloid for hypoperfusion. Okay, and achieve a central venous oxygen saturation 70% or mixed venous oxygen saturation 65%. So next this is from the TOG article, that most common organism of maternal sepsis is E. coli and group B streptococcus. You can see the lines from the TOG article that in maternal sepsis, E. coli and group B streptococcus are the most common bacterial pathogens, but the most severe outcomes are with E. coli and group A streptococcus. MCQ can come regarding the maternal mortality due to sepsis. So when they talk about the maternal death, then always choose the group A Streptococcus. This is again the from the guidelines regarding the risk factors, and for the most common organisms of the sepsis in purpurium, the major pathogens are gas, second number E. coli, and Staphylococcus aureus, Streptococcus pneumoniae, and methicillin resistant Staph aureus. Okay, one more important thing that I want to show you, this is this box. Early presentation of sepsis less than 12 hours post birth is more likely to be caused by streptococcal infection, particularly gas, and severe continuous pain suggest necrotizing fasciitis. Okay, remember, this shows two things. One, within first 24 hours infection can be due to streptococcal infection, and that is particularly group A streptococcus, and severe continuous pain. Okay, and also it causes gas, causes necrotizing fasciitis. Okay, this is the table from the guidelines, and lot of conditions here, and the organism responsible, which antibiotic we will give. If the case of allergy, then we will choose which antibiotic, and memorize this table. This table shows the coverage of the antibiotic, that which organism is covered by which antibiotic. What about urinary retention? Its incidence is 8.1%, and why it happens? Again, the MCQ came for the reason of urinary retention in the postpartum period. The most common, most likely associated with urinary retention is trauma to urethra. Second number, painful episiotomy, and third number, epidural. And mostly after epidural, it takes 8 hours to return normal bladder sensation. And either in case of bladder retention, urinary retention, bladder is palpable abdominally, and if it is not palpable, then you can advise ultrasound to determine the urine volume. What about treatment? There will be the indwelling catheter on continuous drainage for 48 hours, and if further retention occurs, then you can put suprapubic catheter, and then intermittent clamping of the catheter done till normal bladder function returns. Okay, what about the urinary incontinence? 15% of the women after delivery, they have urinary incontinence, and that remains persistent for 3 months. And out of these 15%, 3/4 of the patients, that urinary incontinence persists for 6 years. More common after the instrumental delivery and least common after cesarean section. Urinary fistula are uncommon, but they may occur due to the forceps deliveries, and ureteric fistula can be after complicated cesarean section. What about fecal incontinence? 35% of primary gravida, they have suffer from anal sphincter injury, and mostly MCQ came from for the regarding perineal trauma. That is most common in primary gravidas, and sphincter injury, that is most common in instrumental delivery. Sphincter injury means third and fourth degree tears. Okay, postpartum care, recovery from the cesarean section. First of all, the early mobilization and hydration, and do the sterile dressing for first 24 hours. After that, women should ask to clean the wound with tap water and dry it, and suture will remove on 5th post-op day, and you can discharge the patient on day 1 or 2, and check hemoglobin on day 2 to 3, and if hemoglobin is more than 7 gram per deciliter, oral iron should be prescribed, and if hemoglobin is less than 7 gram per deciliter, less than 7 means severe anemia, so blood transfusion should be given, and resume activities like driving, carry heavy items, and formal exercise, sexual activity once they return to pre-cesarean strength. What about postnatal visits? Patient may be discharged after normal delivery within 6 hours if the delivery is uncomplicated, but she may stay further on request, so honor her wish. And midwife and health visitor, they should visit the woman and baby daily in first 10 days. On later on, if the low risk patient, then at least midwife should have 2 visits in first 10 days, or on demand she can visit. And when she visit, check her blood pressure and ask about the bladder, bowel function, fatigue, headache, perineum. What about episiotomy wound and baby care and baby feeding? And health with the visitor general should continue to visit till 4 weeks. At 2 weeks, evaluate the baby for baby blues, okay, the patient for the baby blues, and formal visit at 6 weeks by the general practitioner or obstetrician. And at that visit, again, doctor should inquire about the mental health and physical health and baby progress, and also ask about the urinary, bowel and sexual function. Sometimes patient hesitate to tell about the incontinence, so direct question must be asked about these symptoms. Check blood pressure, weight of the patient, urine analysis should be done, and cervical smear if it's due. Preferably it should be done at 3 months. And discuss about the contraception, baby immunization and exercise. Infant feeding. Feeding sometimes as a MCQ came from the basics, like milk production by the prolactin, milk ejection initiated by suckling, and the treatment of the breast engorgement, like manual expression, firm support, and cabbage leaves, ice bags. So if they ask about initial management, then you will choose these conservative measures. And if they ask about specific pharmacological, then you will give about this, and we will talk about in the later slide. And a lactocele can be formed, and this is a sterile, this is also called lactocele, and this is a sterile milk filled retention cyst of the mammary duct following blockage of the by thickened secretions. And the most common infecting organism is Staph aureus, which is found in 40% of women with mastitis, and 10% of women with mastitis develop a breast abscess. And when breast abscess will develop, an infectious mastitis will occur 7 to 10 days. Okay, we have already discussed that mastitis is of 2 types: congestive, that can occur at second to third day, and plus mastitis can be infective, that occurs at 7 to 10 day. Frequently asked questions regarding these breastfeeding: growth of the milk secreting apparatus. The growth of the milk secreting apparatus during pregnancy under the influence of estrogen, progesterone, human placental lactogen, prolactin, cortisol, insulin, thyroxine, all these are responsible for the development of secreting milk secreting apparatus. And milk synthesis is under the influence of prolactin, and milk ejection is under the influence of oxytocin. And why mature milk secretion forms after delivery? Increased progestin inhibits during pregnancy, it inhibits the lactalbumin production during pregnancy. So what is the first stimulus for the milk secretion? Which is the progesterone withdrawal. This MCQ can come. And that which is the first stimulus for the milk secretion? That is progesterone withdrawal. How breastfeeding causes lactational amenorrhea? Suckling basically inhibits the dopamine, and that causes increased prolactin and further secondary amenorrhea. So this is one of the MCQ from this 35-year-old woman, gravida 3 para 3, presents to your office 3 weeks after uncomplicated vaginal delivery. She has been successfully breastfeeding, and she reports chills and fever up to 38.3 degrees centigrade at home, and she states that she feels like she has flu but has not had any sick contact, and she has no medical problems, prior surgeries, allergies or medication. On examination she has temperature of 38 degrees centigrade, that is 100.4 Fahrenheit, and generally appears in no distress. Head, ear, throat, lung, cardiac, abdominal, pelvic examinations all are normal. A triangular area of erythema and tenderness is noted in upper outer quadrant of the left breast. No masses or axillary lymphadenopathy are noted. And which of the following is the best option for the treatment of this patient? So what are the options? Admission to the hospital for IV antibiotic. So they already told in the scenario that patient is having no distress, only fever is there, and triangular area of erythema and tenderness is noted in the upper quadrant of the breast. So admission is not required. And B option is bromocriptine to suppress the breast milk production. No, she is breastfeeding, so why we suppress the breast milk production? C is incident and drainage. No, because this is not an abscess, this is just erythema, and signs of inflammation are there. D option is the oral dicloxacillin for 10 to 14 days. That is the right option. And E option is oral erythromycin for 7 days. So what they told, the most common causative organism is Staphylococcus aureus and is probably transmitted from the infant's nose and throat, and initial antibiotic therapy should be directed at this organism and should consist either dicloxacillin 500 mg orally 4 times a day or cephalexin 500 mg orally 4 times a day for total of 10 to 14 days. And if in penicillin allergic patient, give clindamycin. Remember this also, that give clindamycin 300 mg orally 3 times a day. And if mass is palpable and abscess is suspected, then our answer will be incision and drainage. But remember, milk production should not be suppressed. Side by side you can give the symptomatic relief with ibuprofen, ice packs. So blood stained nipple discharge. Blood stained nipple discharge of pregnancy, rusty pipe syndrome is called, and is typically bilateral and believed to be due to the epithelial proliferation. It usually occurs late in pregnancy or early breastfeeding and lasts for up to 1 week, as the condition is self-limiting. If not settled within 1 week, then you can go for the further investigation. But in the initial time period, you can counsel the patient that this condition will be settled on its own. Okay, these are the 10 steps for the successful bleeding. Have a written breastfeeding policy. Train all staff and inform all pregnant women about the benefits and management of breastfeeding. Help mothers to initiate breastfeeding within 30 minutes of birth. Previously in the antenatal chapter we have read that it is 1 hour, but this was more important. Remember this for the MCQ. If they ask about the initiation of the breastfeeding, you should choose within first 30 minutes. Okay. Foster the establishment of breastfeeding support groups, and practice 24-hour roaming in, and encourage breastfeeding on demand. Give newborn infants no other food or drink unless medically indicated. Point number 10, use no artificial threats. And suppression of lactation. Once I have as I have told you people that first you choose the general measures for the suppression of the milk, and if the pharmacological is indicated, then you can give cabergoline 1 milligram stat to prevent lactation, or 0.25 milligram twice daily for 2 days to suppress established lactation. Bromocriptine can also be given, but it is contraindicated due to the risk of heart attack and stroke. Breastfeeding, it's beneficial 10%. It causes 10% reduction in the premenopausal breast cancer, and remember, it has no effect on the postmenopausal breast cancer. Okay, that is the contraception. So remember, contraception, these are I will tell you in the other slide, like FSRH guidelines regarding combined hormonal contraception. In the combined hormonal contraception, you can, if first you will look at which gestation patient comes to you, and second, either it's she is breastfeeding or not. Okay, if the patient is breastfeeding and is at 0 to less than 6 weeks postpartum, never give combined hormonal contraception because it is category 4. Category 4 means contraindicated. And B is equal to, if patient comes at 6 weeks or more than 6 weeks to less than 6 months, then see, combined hormonal contraception is category 2. Category 2 means benefits are more than risk you can give. So in MCQ mostly they ask when to start CHC, then you will choose, you can choose at 3 weeks or 21 day. No, sorry, at if patient is breastfeeding, you can give at 6 weeks, not 3 weeks. 3 weeks you can give if patient is not feeding. So if patient comes at 6 months postpartum, it's category 1, you can easily give. And why we are not giving? Because of increased risk of thromboembolism, and plus it also suppress the milk production. In second case, when the patient is not breastfeeding and she is at 0 to less than 3 weeks, there are further 2 categories with one risk factor, with other risk factor of venous thromboembolism, then category 4. And if there are no risk factor for the venous thromboembolism and patient is at 0 to less than 3 weeks, it is category 3. And if the patient is at 3 to less than 6 weeks with risk factor category 3, without risk factor category 2, and at 6 weeks or more than 6 weeks, it is category 1. So if the patient is breastfeeding, it becomes category 1 at 6 months, and if the patient is not breastfeeding, it becomes category 1 at 6 weeks. And next question came for the IUCD. So IUCD you can give either within first 48 hours or at 4 to 6 weeks. So mostly question they ask at 4 weeks, then at 4 weeks you can choose IUCD, but not between 48 hours to 4 weeks, you will not choose IUCD. So thank you very much.